All right, so let's get started. We're a couple of minutes early, but there's plenty of content, and I don't want to be late for lunch, so let's go for it. Hey, thanks all for coming out to my talk. We're going to take a brief tour through the history of the realities and project forward a little bit into the future. So I'm Keir Rice. I'm most recently a co-founder of NZXR. A bunch of amazing people. We teamed together to create XR solutions that are kind of at the intersection of hardware, software, and humans. And Clay Fox is where I do my freelance consulting and technical art for hire type stuff. Before all that, I was at Magic Leap, Weta Game Shop, Pickpock, and Chi. I've been making games in Wellington for the last 13 years, and 5 of those have been in XR. And I also tweet too much over at Keir Rice, so happy to do follow-up questions and things like that, or just chat. All right, quick disclaimer, these are all personal views, so they're not necessarily representative of what NZXR thinks as a whole. I don't want to put words in other people's mouths. I've got relationships and NDAs with some of these companies, so take that on board when I'm speculating. And also, all information presented here is kind of public realm information with sources, or it's kind of speculation based on public information. And I'll give you the link to the slides with all the sources and everything for it at the end. So before I dive in, I want to kind of just address some of the terminology, but what I mean by the realities. So this is how I'm going to address it. So augmented reality is kind of like digital content overlaid on the real world, kind of like Pokémon Go, heads-up display in an aircraft, things like that. Mixed reality is more like your digital content incorporated into the real world. So there's some context there. You can see a wall, you can get some semantic segmentation, you can see there's grass, there's a table, things like that. It also kind of implies that there's some sort of occlusion involved. So virtual objects can go in behind real objects. And then virtual reality is digital content that replaces the real world. So things like Beat Saber. And lastly, XR is just the shorthand for the superset of all of these things. Right, so let's dive into a bit of history. So as an industry, where did we come from? I would argue it started in about 1931, or at least that's where we're going to start our journey today, with the Link trainer. Named after Edwin Link, this was the first flight simulator. And I reckon it's the first VR system. The pilot jumps in and sits inside this little cockpit there. Cover goes over. They're flying on instruments. They have no external stimulus apart from what's being fed into them by their flight operator, who's controlling things like being their radio control tower and wind currents and weather and things like that. This is pre-computer. This is all electromechanical. This is how pilots trained during World War II. Let's see here. It's our little happy chat.
And when you have theoretically come in for a landing and touched down under minimum visibility conditions, believe me, you feel like it was for real too. Lieutenant Haley will move on to actual instrument flight. And when he graduates, he will take his place up.
Yeah. So then along came computers. So we're going to skip forward a bunch of time. Mainframe computers are huge machines that were serving entire universities. And time on them was kind of allocated and logged like to the second. Like these were big, expensive, serious machines doing big, expensive, serious work. And it wasn't until like the late 50s, 1959, that we got the PDP-1, which was one of the first mini computers. So in this image up here, everything that's painted this lovely shade of blue is a component of the mini computer. These things were kind of bought to be like add-ons and peripherals and drive things that the mainframe was too busy to do and manage some of the occasional tasks, which meant that they weren't kind of allocated to the same degree and people could start to sit down and play with them a little bit. One of the people was Steve Russell. He blazed a trail that we've all followed. When confronted with a computer, he made a game. So Spacewar was born at MIT in 1962. It's a project to show off what they could do with these new mini computers. He spent about 6 weeks to program the first version by hand on punch cards in assembler. Some would argue that Tennis for Two on the right there is the first video game. but that was actually using an artillery trajectory calculator hooked up to an oscilloscope. So basically, instead of shells, they just hacked it to make it tennis balls, and they had a couple of controllers. So that was kind of a fixed purpose machine versus Spacewar on the left here. We've got the two ships kind of orbiting, controlling their fuel and kind of shooting at each other. That was the first kind of general purpose computer game. And this was kind of a bit of an open source project. The source code was passed around. People contributed to it for years, adding things like, faster trigonometry functions, realistic star fields in the back because randomly generated wasn't good enough. Added this kind of like sun point in the middle, so there's an actual gravity well that they're flying in and orbiting around. Right. Also on the PDP-1, over at Harvard, was Ivan Sutherland. So Ivan developed some of the first head-mounted displays. So this is Ivan wearing the Sword of Damocles unit. This was kind of unlocked by access to the computers as well as access to hardware like these tubes sticking out the side. Those are actually cathode ray tubes like you'd find in old TVs that are actually like firing electrons onto the screens and then using prisms to bounce it back into his field of vision. So this is kind of like the first augmented reality display. It was named the Sword of Damocles because of the rig they used for all of their tracking kind of hung above them and it looked quite precarious. So this is actual video of it in play, and if you look closely you can see there's a wireframe cube there. So this is back in 1968, and they had two different setups. This one is physically attached to the ceiling, and they had another one that was using ultrasonics to kind of track. They had full 6DoF tracking, i.e. they could measure the orientation of the wearer as well as their position in space. Ivan Sullivan seen here, he's using a light pen to enter points and kind of model some 3D objects to put on his new display. The software he's using is called Sketchpad. It's a program he wrote for his PhD, in which he pioneered a bunch of stuff like multi-window user interfaces, as well as some concepts like object-oriented programming. Like he invented the notions of object and instance, and he was also pioneering in the use of classes in terms of programming this stuff. Like this guy was pretty incredible, and he's at a time he's making AR and head-mounted visions and inventing programming way back in the 1968 before all of that stuff kind of fell away. But yeah, so it's pretty impressive. But progress was pretty slow. The field was fertile. Everybody was running around trying out all their things and pushing it as hard as they can. The wireframe boxes that we saw, like just calculating the trigonometry from that is, that's a significant workload on these machines. But computers got faster, smaller, more accessible, but not so much on the realities in the 70s. We got things like AR concepts making it into aircraft. So this is the McDonnell Douglas Vital helmet. So it's still got the old CRT tubes strapped to the side, which incidentally is quite high voltage. So that's just sitting on the side and redirected into their vision. It unlocked they had a bunch of sensors like radar that could see where planes were before the pilots could see it, but they had a heads-up display in front that was kind of where they would put that information. So this was the first helmet where they took the information off the HUD and put it in the space around the pilot. So if the pilot's scanning around looking for a plane, by the time they saw the plane over there, it was highlighted in a nice box. Maybe they couldn't see it through the clouds, but they knew exactly where it was. And the feedback was bidirectional. They had the sensors highlighting areas in their field of view, as well as using the orientation of the pilot's head as a selector for targeting. So they would look at the plane and that would tell the flight computer that, oh, this is the plane we're selecting for our weapon system, etc. So kind of interesting. 80s, computers kept shrinking. Atari, Nintendo, and SEGA were starting to make appearances in people's homes. Back in 87 already, we had home systems that were trying out stereoscopic shutter glasses on home consoles. They didn't really take off because the upgrade kind of halved the frame rate, because now you need to do half your frame rate's dedicated to the left eye, half your frame rate's dedicated to the right eye, and the NES isn't known for its high frame rates to start with. So they didn't really take off, but there was a lot of experimentation. By the mid-'80s, we start seeing things which are recognizably VR. So this is VPL Research. One of the founders, Jaron Lanier, founded VPL. He was former Atari and went on to become hugely influential in the VR scene. So that's the guy on the right in the dreads. He's actually playing some instruments that he's developed in VR using his headset system and a data glove. So it's actually tracking his hand position in space. So these were unlocked by advances in fiber optics, as well as the introduction of LCD panels. So you didn't have to have these high voltage CRT display units humming in your ear. This company was the first one to sell VR goggles. They went on and developed a range of VR equipment, such as the data glove, Audiosphere, and the data suit. Oh, sorry, wrong image. This is Steven Spielberg's 2018 science fiction action film, Ready Player One. This is the data suit. So an extension of the data glove, lots of sensors all over. They wanted fully bodied VR spaces. They also worked on the first iPhone. This is the iPhone. iPhone system demoed at Texaco Telecommunication Show held in San Francisco in 1988. We've got 2 users there with full VR orientation tracking, and they're in a virtual world talking to each other. 1988. VPL also teamed up with other people like NASA for the Visual Interface Environment Workstation, which could display synthetic environments or remote camera streams. So they had remote streams with camera setups on robots that could look around as the user looked around, with full binaural audio, like stereo, so you can turn your head and hear what's going on. So they were looking at kind of like telepresence work type stuff and interacting with robots that are far away. VPL also teamed up with Nintendo for the Power Glove. The Power Glove was actually a component of a much larger VR project. Mattel, VPL, and Nintendo were all kind of involved in this project to make a VR console. And the Power Glove was the only part that kind of saw the light of day. It's also, I think, really cool to note that the tradition of googly eyes goes way back as well. So this was spotted in a news clip on VR from the early 90s. During this period, the foundations of VR were laid. What worked, what didn't, what's the minimum set of hardware you could use to pull this off, as well as massive cultural impact. All the stories and music and movies that were kind of generated off the back of these things. There's sci-fi classics like Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash are kind of riffing on these devices, saturating the popular media. All right, the arcade. So we're into the 90s now. Virtuality shows up and starts selling high-end VR units to arcades around the world for an inflation-adjusted $116,000 a pop. Smoke machines were extra. They had some pretty cool tech. They had the controller as well as the headset were both magnetically tracked. So, shout out to anyone who's had to develop for the STEM virtual reality controller. You'll appreciate how much work that would have been to make it work. The displays in there rocking a solid 0.2 megapixels of display. That's kind of 270 by 370 pixels. So not great, but it's VR. They had a game called Dactyl Nightmare, which was a 2-player first-person shooter. And incidentally, this was kind of like my introduction into the world of VR, watching a clip of this on a show called Beyond 2000. Memories of my childhood. Later on, they extended this with Dactyl Nightmare 2, which supported 4-player and introduced Capture the Egg mode. Back in, this was kind of probably 93, 94 when they released the second version. So the games in this time were low resolution, low frame rate, low polygon, disorientating, and cool as all heck. They were doing articles on this stuff on 60 Minutes, which was, Sunday night, the top-rated show at the time. It was big stuff. It was absolutely saturating the culture. But the 90s were also this mash of VR buzzwords, and confusing marketing around VR devices was rampant. Hardware commodification kicked in, prices started to come down, units were starting to enter the homes. The ones on the left are basically LCD displays strapped to your face. There's no actual tracking there. Some of the ones on the right were like PC attachments that had a little bit of tracking. Sometimes they were stereoscopic, sometimes they were monocular. It was really hit and miss as to what counted as VR. We also had things like the Virtual Boy, no tracking but stereoscopic game console. Didn't do great, potentially due to the price and the fact that it was a monochrome display, kind of put people off a little bit. SEGA had a crack at VR. 1993, they were launching for Christmas. They had all their advertising lined up. They had their cereal boxes in stores with the promotions, win the new SEGA VR console. They got to August of 1993, and then they got their research results back from the universities, and they were making all the kids sick. So they pulled it, and it never hit the shelves. Sorry, that was an add-on for the Genesis. What's next? The VFX One headgear. That's the PlayStation VR in a promotion with The Walk, 2015 American 3D biographical drama film. This is the VFX One headgear. This was 1995. This is a PC-based VR headset. So unlocked by faster computers like the Intel Pentium Pro 166 megahertz, graphics cards like the 3DFX Voodoo were out. It launched for an inflation-adjusted $1,200 US. This thing came with a breakout box to connect it, as well as an adapter interface card that you had to install in your computer, and a special link cable to go across your graphics card to power it. It's pretty cool. In terms of display though, it was just 0.12 megapixels, so this is half of what the Virtuality systems were doing at the time. So things got really quiet in the world of VR. Companies went bust and the world moved on. Mobile phones became a thing, the internet became a thing, computers getting smaller and better. And eventually we end up with the reality explosion of the 2010s. 2012, Oculus kicked off a Kickstarter campaign to fund the Oculus Rift development. Oculus itself as a company was only 2 months old when they launched the Kickstarter. They raised $3 million US from about 10,000 contributors. Just 2 years later, having only released the DK1, the first development kit, Facebook dropped $2 billion in cash and stock to buy them. Smart glasses started to become a thing, unlocked by some advances in display manufacturing. We started to get into LCOS, which is like liquid crystal displays, but built using computer chip fabrication techniques. Very small, start doing things like the Google Glass. So the Google Glass was about $1,700 when it was released. Also sparked some strong debates around privacy expectations in public place and always on cameras and things like that. But they were starting to roll out. Augmented reality displays started to come out. We've got the DAQRI here, which is the helmet system, as well as the, I think it's the Meta. Yeah, the Meta 1 developer kit. These systems are starting to use cameras and to do inside-out tracking and SLAM, which is like the simultaneous location and mapping. That's where you take a camera feed and you reverse it back and figure out how assume the world stayed still, how would the camera have to move to make the image work? So you can do tracking based on the camera. So these units started to do 6-off tracking. So 46 years after the Sword of Damocles, we have our first commercial products, which are starting to emulate that stuff. 2015 saw an explosion of cheap headsets. Google literally made one out of cardboard. Samsung Gear VR was around. Even Viewmaster got in on the action and made one. It was a nice throwback. These are all 3 degrees of freedom. There's no translational movement. They're all just rotation and orientation. Snapchat made AR cool, but didn't call it AR. They paid $150 million for Look3 to launch this feature, and it worked. They're now rocking 200 million daily active users. Like, if you're looking at AR, there's a player. Niantic enters the scene with Pokémon Go. The launch was a bit of a phenomenon. Can't say that one today. Off the back of this, like, Nintendo's stock price literally doubled. Nintendo only has a very minor stake. There's other companies involved. They just happen to be associated with it somehow. I don't understand. But they didn't give all of those games back that they held up, so I don't know. Pokemon Go went on to be the 5th highest grossing mobile game. It's currently sitting at about $6.5 billion US. To put into context, it's sandwiched in between Clash of Clans and Candy Crush Saga at the moment on the leaderboards of Capitalism Mobile. Mobile OSs started to jump into the fray with abstractions of AR to make some of these, to bring some of these features like SLAM into the mobile space. Apple with ARKit, Google with AR Core, and they're expanding that. This is kind of unlocked by a bunch of machine learning. Really was the shot in the arm for the SLAM tracking, and I don't know if you used some of the tracking early on. It was very jittery and wobbly, and now on an iPhone 12 it's rock solid. 2016, we get room scale VR. This is kind of unlocked by a lot of research into the motion tracking, like in the film industry with performance capture for animation and things like that. It kind of got commodified in with the Valve HTC, actually having like lighthouse stations around and kind of outside-in tracking, which provided a good path for some of these consoles. So for many people, this was the first intro to kind of home VR. We're now up to about 2.5 megapixels and running at 90 hertz. So we've got the resolution, and more importantly, we've got the frame rate to kind of support movement without making everyone throw up. Well, without making a lot of people throw up. There's still issues, still places to go. Mixed reality. 2016, we started to get our first taste of mixed reality devices. So this is a clip from Magic Leap, putting synthetic objects floating in context in a room with tracking. We had the Microsoft HoloLens. This is like a Kinect plus a display, like a holographic display, plus a high-end phone squished into a headband. This thing is incredible. It's wireless, and they're going for inflation adjusted. They're about 3,400. They started to do things like semantic segmentation. They could find areas of the scene like a seat, a place that a character could sit down on, a flat surface that could be a table, a wall, a floor. Magic Leap 1, again, self-contained unit, has one of the best mixed reality games out there, Dr. Grawbots Invaders. Good stuff. These are running at about 2,300 US dollars. Meta 2 is also out in the field, though they're focused on the kind of tethered to PC experience at the moment. Economies of scale start kicking in, and we get a lot of upgrades. HoloLens 2, Oculus Rift S, Valve Index, Vajaro, Pixmax, blah, 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 blah. We're into the kind of 2 to 4 megapixel range for these displays now. There's like tens of companies who are doing these devices. Mixed reality is kind of also moving forward. HoloLens 2's out, Magic Leap 2's coming end of year. Snap, of Snapchat fame, is dropping glasses as well. Still experimental, but that's kind of something to keep an eye on. So, where are we going? VR's looking really good. AR Insider's projecting that by 2024 we're going to have an install base of about 34 million devices out there, and the market's still growing. Both Oculus Quest and the Valve Index were actually supply limited. There was more demand than they could actually supply, to the point that with the Quest 2, they're shipping 5x on the Quest 1, so 5 times more units than they were the first time. So there's demand out there. Revenue from games is also predicted to grow, and the Oculus store alone, 69 titles have now crossed the $1 million US mark in terms of earnings. And if you're going to target a platform, the Quest is probably going to be pretty high up your list. Oculus is completely dominating in terms of headset usage at the moment, headset sales. The Quest 2 is by far the most popular device out there. They're kind of, Oculus is currently occupying about 53% of the market, and that's without the Quest 2 numbers coming in for this year, so it's going to be significantly better. It's worth pointing out that the mixed reality devices aren't even a blip on here at the moment. They're somewhere buried in the others. Also, VR hardware sales are dominated by the standalone units. 70% of the headsets are standalone, that is, they don't have a tether to any other system. That includes like your PlayStation VR. So PlayStation VR is kind of small. That's not to say there isn't a market there, it's just smaller than some of the others. So what about mixed reality? That's kind of where my passion is. I think it's still got a long way to go. I definitely wouldn't spend my own money making a retail game for the HoloLens or Magic Leap at the moment. Like, I feel like mixed reality is kind of at the point that VR was in the early 90s. So if we have a look at if we assume VR is kind of like hand wavy, it had a blip in the 90s and then it kind of died away, and then as the hardware came online, it absolutely exploded in the kind of 2010s. I think we're seeing the same kind of small blip of early hardware now for mixed reality devices in the 2020s, and I think it's probably going to take until the 2030s before we're going to see significant uptake. But there's a lot of people who are putting a lot of money in to try and kind of shift that line closer. Everybody wants to be there first. So like literally tens of billions of dollars are pouring in to try and close that gap. But I think before we go there, before we hit mainstream adoption and start displacing cell phones, there's going to need to be a lot more progress in terms of comfort and style. The units just aren't fashionable at the moment. Like, you wouldn't really wear them out and about. Snap maybe, but the function's not there to match on Snap. They sacrifice functionality for form. Battery, nothing on the market is even close to doing a full day. And in terms of optics and the kind of like the lenses and the displays, like they're okay. They work best inside. They work best in dimmer environments. If you're going to take them outside, it's a rough time at the moment. So we're going to need to boost the brightness there. See the field of view. Like, the ideal would be to have edge-to-edge display. Whether that's physically possible or not, I'm sure some clever engineers will figure that out soon. So I just quickly want to run through some of the big players as we wrap up here. Facebook wants to be the metaverse and to sell ads in it. So when I say metaverse, I'm talking about a place or a community or a situation where lots of people kind of congregate and talk and kind of exist in this space. So examples of kind of metaverses-ish at the moment, you've got kind of Facebook doing its Horizons thing, which isn't really out yet. You've got some of the big games like Fortnite. Anywhere that people go and kind of just to hang out with their friends and they don't really care about the gameplay, I kind of roll that into kind of like metaverse discussions. The extension of that is kind of like the internet for places like that, where you could seamlessly hop around between sites and between places, but that's a whole talk in itself. So Facebook has 10,000 employees in its Reality Labs division. That's 20% of their entire company is focused on VR today. If you think about the average salary of a US tech worker times 10,000, it's a big bet. Roblox and Epic, they've got places people hang out. Fortnite's got 25 million DAU. Roblox, 42 million DAU. You've got cultural events like the Ariana Grande tour coming up, like concerts inside Fortnite, where it's the players are there to kind of experience this. This is a limited run. You know, it'll be on for a week or two. You buy your ticket, you go and you hang out, and you run around and you emote and you dance and you play. It's a big deal. Roblox. So Fortnite itself is kind of on a content treadmill of staying as culturally relevant as they can. A lot of IP brand crossover, big events, lots of content. Churn the content through as fast as you can. Keep people entertained. Roblox, on the other hand, is all user-generated content. So you go and you play little games that people have made. Often it's kind of like hobby games and projects and kids mucking around for the first time and playing with their friends, and it's a good time. In terms of Roblox as a company is worth twice as much as Epic right now. I think there's something like on the order of like $35 billion US market cap right now. Big money. Niantic and Snap. They want to keep their users engaged. They're both approaching things from the consumer end of the market versus most players are arriving from the tech end of the market. Snap's already at 200 million DAU. They've got their AR filters. They've got their amazing AR studio for developing filters. They can do things like you've all seen the faces and things like that. They're expanding out. They can do capture of like full people dancing and put skeletons in it and rig up so you can put on like a virtual costume and dance around. They've got things like garment segmentation now so that they can pull out your shirt and replace it with some digital content. It's kind of cool. And they've both got massive user bases. Like Niantic has weaponized their Pokémon Go players into scanning the world. They're doing photogrammetry scanning in Pokémon Go. It's cool. And they're also teasing hardware. Something to watch out for. Apple's got a surprising number of people working on this, as well as a surprising number of pieces in play. They'll wait until they got a premium product, but they're working on it. Things like their iPhone 12 now have time-of-flight LiDAR sensors. They got amazing scanning in the 1 to 5 meter range. They've got machine learning for further than that. They've got their AR kit. They've got their AirPods. Who knew that AirPods have accelerometers in them? Full head orientation tracking relative to the phone. And an audio feed in. And a watch. And tagged objects around the house or galleries or things with potentially location data built into them. That's cool. I think they're gonna launch with something, a big kind of feature like Air Screen, where it's taking a display and putting it into your glasses so you can have your virtual screen anywhere based on your iPhone. Google, they want all the data, sell all the ads. They're doing amazing stuff with their Maps division. Microsoft wants all the money. Corporate people go there to build custom stuff. Their cloud stuff is amazing. They've got localization stuff, which is on point. Best out there at the moment through Azure. Magic Leap, they want customers. If you're a corporate who can build your own software, Magic Leap's the place to be. Qualcomm want to power everything. They're selling shovels in the gold rush. At CES, they had 30 devices on the floor powered by their Qualcomm X2 chips. So, the future, I'm super excited about the future of realities, especially mixed reality. We're far enough through that we have amazing toys to play with, but not so far that it's impossible to kind of shape the direction where we're going. And things are still developing. We're still developing the practices and the conventions of an entire industry. So if you want to hear more about that, this is the plug for James Everett's talk at 5, titled Aotearoa, a Leader for an Equitable AR Future. And I think it's well worth showing up and see where we can push this. Presentation slides will be available at Clayfox, my website, /NZGDC21. Thank you.